Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Jason Flame, host of the Master Motivation Podcast, and welcome to our show with another amazing guest today. As always, my goal is to bring motivation, inspiration, and education, and I think that we're going to get a little bit of each one today. Our guest is Mr. Tom Patire, who is America's leading personal safety expert. He is America's foremost expert on personal safety, dubbed America's leading personal safety expert by multi-facets of the media. Tom has dedicated his life to educating people about personal safety, personal well-being, and personal protection. Though his comprehensive lecture series, motivational speaking, best-selling books, and customized courses, Tom has become and remains the leader when it comes to personalized safety. His courses are empowering and educational based on confrontational avoidance techniques, situational awareness cues, and self-escape methods. Tom has empowered tens of thousands of ordinary people of all ages throughout the world with his life-saving Tom's tips and Tom's techniques. As an elite bodyguard to the world's VIPs, as well as a fellow concerned parent, Tom places great emphasis on keeping safe those around us, be they our families, children, or senior citizens. As a result, Tom has spoken at length and authored many materials promoting personalized safety, travel safety, work safety, home safety, and general public safety tips for all ages, especially children, families, women, and senior citizens. Sir, thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Listen, I got to ask because, in the martial arts world, we talk so much about self-defense. And the term that comes up in yours that I hear a lot more being used is self-protection. And tell me what you think the difference between those two are.
Well, when you deal in mainstream like I do, people don't want to commit like we have in our lifetimes to putting the time to be a great martial artist and to be a person that could execute under pressure. And that takes repetition after repetition, all that. So in self-protection, I train the brain before I train the brawn, so I get the mind right. I teach people what I call a triangle method of safety on confrontational avoidance, how to see it, read it, avoid it. Don't get into that situation and it's aggressor, which I call a bad guy, if you can't defend. So avoid, and you only avoid by paying attention. We all talk about situational awareness, but what does that all mean? What are your senses like? Is your energy down? Are you in the wrong place at the wrong time? Are you preoccupied? So I develop people again to think before they act, and it works pretty well.
Great. And you mentioned something in the bio about as a concerned parent. What is your motivation for being at the forefront of self-protection, being a bodyguard, and all the services that you provide?
So for a long time, I was always behind the scenes. I worked most of my life overseas, came here, opened the protection company on executive protection, and I never wanted to be in the forefront. So hindsight being 2020, I started working for Mr. Rupert Murdoch in Fox, and Mr. Murdoch was at the time having twins, and I had just had a son. And he's like, well, listen, can't you take what you do and put it out there on TV? So I started appearing regularly on Fox and Good Day America and all those other things, not as a tough guy, not as a black belt, but as a dad that cares. What could everyday people do, not only to protect themselves, but these kids that are always targeted, and what and how they can do it by not having the time to spend in a martial arts school. So I honed it all in. I found a different way to become your own bodyguard. But again, everything I do is confrontational avoidance. And if confronted, self-escape methods more than self-defense.
Mm-hmm. Now, tell me, how did that affect you going from behind the scenes to now being on national news and talk shows where people are really seeing you, up front and seeing you out in the open, right? How did that affect you and your business model?
First of all, Jason, it's a great question. And I troubleshoot myself. I was a hard ass. Okay. In protection, you have to be, you deal with a lot of different variables. You don't have time to be a nice guy, but then you're not a karate killer either. You just have to be abrupt when you need to. So when I was approached by Random House to write my personal protection handbook, I wrote a book, The Tom Patire Way, and I remember them reading it and throwing it in the garbage. And I'm like, he goes, hey, this is a good book if you want to be a Navy SEAL or something. This has nothing to do with mainstream. So I learned that, the tough guy image we all have at some point in our younger lives, ego based, has to transform into a concerning image. So it took me a while, a couple of years of getting used to TV and all this other stuff. But I've learned to hone my craft and not be afraid to show vulnerability. And that's the key. People have to know that no matter what we do, how well we are, and I know you run a great school and all that, but you're vulnerable, you're approachable, you could be talked to. And
Mm-hmm.
you know what? Made my book a top seller. I sold over 600,000 copies. And for a safety book, that's astronomical.
Mm-hmm.
But I found the link. The link is vulnerability.
Well, it's so interesting that we talk about this subject because as a martial arts instructor, especially starting out, in my teen years, I actually opened my martial arts school when I was 19 years old. Everything was all about, the appearance and how you portrayed yourself. And at that time in my life, you know, eh, what else do you know but to be kind of militaristic, to be that hard ass, right? To be, to prove how tough you are. But I couldn't agree with you more in the fact that things changed for me so much and still continue to change for me over the years when I do become more vulnerable, right? And explain things that I'm feeling, things that I'm going through. I am more authentic, and not just playing a part. And those relationships with the people that I teach have changed 100-fold because of that. So, just being transparent, being authentic, being vulnerable. It's a huge part of what we do if we're in a martial arts school or in a position where you're dealing with people on a regular basis that you want to keep around for a long time, right? I mean, the hard ass approach only lasts so long. I mean, my daughter proved that very easily in the first couple years of her life. Daddy was not as tough as he thought he was as soon as my daughter had me wrapped around her finger.
Brother, they melt your heart. My son's 27 now, and we go to the super show like yourself, and we're always there. And I am a guy that studies people. But I'm also a non-emotional guy. My face is always the same. I learned that in protection. I mean, my company's going to be 35 years old in bodyguarding. So I've been there a while. And my son
Mm-hmm.
will say, "Hey, Dad, can so-and-so meet you?" They're afraid to approach you. I said, "I'm having a seltzer. Why would they be afraid to?" He goes, "Dad, it's your face. So, I get it. I get what you're saying. We all, the martial art community, have a lot to offer, but not a lot of us are approachable. And I think that's what we have to learn as instructors.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. You brought up the Super Show. That in fact is was my first experience with hearing you speak or teach or be involved in the martial arts industry. So tell us a little bit more about your martial arts background and what led you to be a part of, coming to the Super Show.
Well, I started off in Tamiki Aikido. All right. And I was 8 or 9 at the time. I moved into different types of jujitsu, and then, I met a crossroad. I met an instructor who taught a system not well known called the Hamdo system. And it was more eclectic Korean things. I would say above a Hapkido, more like a Farangdo, a lot of joint stuff, either took out or annihilated mentality. I drew to it, and I
Hmm.
started studying. That was back in the time when everybody was doing point fighting. I've never fought a point fighting match in my life. I wouldn't even know what to do. So when I was training, I grew up in a very tough town called Lodi, New Jersey. People were like, well, this guy's a maniac. He's this, he's that, because self-defense systems in the 80s weren't there yet.
Right.
Now that's all you see is everybody's, personal protection or high level this, high level that. So martial arts evolved. Uh, but that got me into it. My instructor also was a governmental agent. He worked for a certain agency, and I told him, I wanted to be a bodyguard. Even though I went to college for a school teacher, I graduated as a phys ed health teacher, degree in nutrition, master's degree. I couldn't find a job. He's like, well, listen, I'll send you to different schools and we'll put you out in real world. I loved it. I just absolutely loved it. My first ever celebrity protection person was Eddie Van Halen. And he was at the China Club in New York. And I happened to be called by this agency. I was working for another agency before I opened mine. I met Eddie and Valerie. They were great, great people. And I got to do 3 months with Van Halen, and I was in my 20s, and you can have more fun than that. You
No way.
But I learned as I traveled through with different people like Michael Jackson and people like I did all the tours. I did the Kiss, I did the Stones. It's a headache world. It really is. It's good if you're young and you want experience, but the real protection is in the high level executives, the traveling overseas. I mean, that's the quality work where you really have to ghost in, ghost out mentality. I'm writing a new book. It's called The Private Protector. And in it, I say, I believe I was born to bodyguard. And I do, because I don't get rattled quick. I understand the third party mentality that most people don't do. And I love the work, even at my age today, I'm 64. I still do the work, like I was 20. I mean, because it's in me. And then this, if it's in you, you know it. But not a lot of people get to find out who they are.
Right.
We
Well,
happen to be lucky.
so let me ask you that. A lot of people don't find what their purpose in life is, right? How did you find that? I mean, what said to you like, this is what I was put on earth to do? How did you draw that conclusion?
Actually, it was through a negative. I was working a big situation in New York City, the riots. I was working for Fox at the time, protecting all the news groups. And one of the masks of the truck hit the transformer and everything blew up, like just blew. And the place went completely mayhem. And yet I was calm and stuck to covering my client, getting them out of there and all that. And afterwards, I was like, my mentality, my body, everything acted the way it was supposed to. It didn't freak. And I said, well, this has got to be my calling, because a lot of the other protection guys ran, but I did not. And that's when I believed that this was my profession. So
Nice. Well, I want to go back because I wanted to ask you this when we started talking about where you're from, because I think that most of us can tell you've got a pretty thick East Coast accent,
yeah,
right? From New Jersey. What was it like growing up in New Jersey? And did you start training in martial arts when you were younger, or as you got, in your teen or 20s?
Yeah, so my dad and my brothers were police officers. My dad was a hard Italian, as you could imagine. I had a great mom, and she actually was Russian, so I had a combination of both. My dad was always about, you know what, you don't start trouble, but you don't walk away from it. That mentality. So he put us in the arts, me and my brother, my middle brother, when we were 8 years old. And as a kid back then, you lasted 2, 3 years. Then baseball comes in and basketball, and I was a very good athlete, so I got involved in that. But I had a crossroad. At 12 years old, I was hit by a car. All right. And, I was hurt pretty badly. And I was in high school, and you'll never believe this, but I graduated high school. I was 5'5". Okay. I am 6'4" now, and my knees would hurt, my hips. I learned later by a specialist who got to California that my growth plates were stunted. So being in a tough town where people, like to pick on each other, all that stuff, I went back to the martial arts, probably at the age of 14, 13 and a half, took a little jujitsu, which was okay. But then I met my instructor actually at the Picatinny Arsenal, military place, on 4th of July. And I watched this guy just decimate people. I'm like, I want to do that, unknown that I would be 240 and 6'4" later on in my life. I took it because I was the proverbial kid that got sand kicked in his face,
Right.
and I wasn't going to let that happen. And I never backed down. I didn't win, by the way, but I never backed down, and it's just, it changed. And my dad was all about, defense, and he was a tough guy. He was under Patton in World War II. But he's like, listen, you're going to learn the right way. And he put me right into the martial arts. So I owe him that.
That's awesome. Well, so, one of the things that I love most about, just having this time with people like yourself is just kind of getting to know these stories and the background of, where everything's come from. Tell me a little bit more about, about your family, about your brothers. I grew up with two younger brothers. We all got in martial arts around the same time. We would beat the shit out of each other all the time. It was actually encouraged. My mom would say, if you guys are going to fight about something, just go put the gloves on, get it over with, and let's move on. Right. And so growing up with two brothers that were black belts and kind of always, constantly doing something physical like that. I mean, what was your experience with your brothers like?
I was the youngest. My oldest brother was 10 years older than me. Of course, he was the guy we idolized. Very intelligent guy, knew his stuff. He was a principal his whole life. My middle brother, Timmy, who was a year older than me, he was mischievous. He always got into different trouble and all that. He became the cop. But I never wanted to make it in the town of Lodi. I wanted to make it on my own. Because Lodi was very political. My dad was very connected, and though those guys, my brothers, earned their keep, I didn't see me being a cop. I didn't want to be a school teacher, even though I went to school for it. I just wanted to see what is it like for a kid from Lodi to go out on a protection detail in a country that, they don't like Americans, and how he's going to hold up. It's not like Jason Bourne stuff. You have to use this more than you use this,
Mm-hmm.
and, I just felt the calling. But what was unique in our town, and I don't know where you grew up, but where I grew up, you could play in a school ground, and if a neighbor was having a barbecue, he'd call the kids over, hey, come on, have a hamburger and all that. Now it's not like that. You're afraid who to go near these kids. As I speak in school districts, the biggest thing parents say to me is, I'm afraid who approaches my kids. But back then it wasn't like that, and those times are gone, my friend.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we're a little slight difference in age, but that time, 70s, 80s, even the early 90s are so different than what it is now. And I mean, I look at my own children who are 21 and 18 now, and I mean, growing up like you, man, we were outside all the time, and like far, like we would ride our bikes like 5-10 miles away, no big deal. Come back when the street lights turn on, or if we could hear our mom's voice yelling for us. But now it's like, my kids, I don't think they ever walked to school, although we've lived pretty close to each of the schools. They didn't play outside a lot because they were actually involved in so many more activities than I was when I was a kid. There's just so many differences. But as a martial arts instructor, one of the things that I hear all the time is, the bullying that happens at school, the things that happen, on the way to school, on the way home from school. And I've had many parents, come to me with concerns. And we live so I grew up in Ventura County, California, Southern California. I'm in Moore Park, which was just named the third safest city in all of California.
Well,
Third safest city in all of California. And yet I still have parents that are so concerned with their child's safety, depending on where they are. And it's a very, very different time. What have you noticed contributes to that mindset of the parent that is super afraid, or just the media that portrays the things that they do? What do you think is the biggest contributor to people feeling less safe?
Because I get to travel the country and do these talks, I mean, active shooter is more out there than people know. It's not only these one people making these. There's probably 20 to 30 active shooters a week. People don't even know. Now they could classify as drawing a weapon or shooting a disgruntled employee or mayhem like they do in some of these schools. But it's put people on notice. The other thing that I'm dead set against, when my son was 5 or 6 or 8, his friends would play these video games. And I got to the point where they would come over to my house and I would say, that's it. And I'd take them out and show them how to play stickball. Like they never knew what stickball was, And my son's like, Dad, did you play, video games? I go, we couldn't afford video games. It wasn't there. Our first time we ever had a video game, my brother Timmy went to McDonald's, wrote a scratch off and won an Atari video set. That was our thing for video games. So I think that, does the media portray the negative over positive? Yeah, because if Jason Flame tomorrow saved a cat from drowning, or if a guy in Jason Flame's school said something negative about him, not the good thing is on the front page, the bad thing. The good thing's page 98. So our society gets news headlines through negative action. When I go on TV, the first thing they'll say, on a child abduction is, talk about what their mother could have done different, or father. I go, I am absolutely not going to go on TV after they just lost their child and say what they could have done better. I go, I won't do it. So don't put me on, because I'm not. So I've learned negative press gets more than positive press, and I'll prove it to you. So way back when I wrote my book, I had fired 2 guys from my agency, so they thought it'd be fun to go on the internet and kill me. And this is going back 2000, 2002. And they said a lot of negative and unpolite things. And I just released my book. And I said to my publisher, Random House, I said, this is going to be bad for the book. They go, oh, no, this is going to be great because people are going to want to know if you're real. And they were absolutely right. During that time of the, keyboard coward stuff, my book sold more off the shelves than it did when I did my book tour, which shows people will read material to find something that they could try to doubt and then prove themselves wrong that you can't do that way. But negative press sells more than positive press.
That's just crazy, right? I mean, it's just, yeah, it's wild. It's wild that the negativity spreads so quickly and so fast. And I look at things sometimes in the martial arts school, right? We could do 10 things really, really well, right? For even, whether it's for one family or for the entire school, 10 things that are positive, great, good. And then the one the one bad thing that happens, like everybody's talking about it, right? And and for my own mental capacity, it's like I can hear 10 positive comments and feel pretty good about it. But as soon as I hear one negative, I'm like, oh my God, we got to change everything. What do we need to do? And it's just like, it's just the way our psychology is. It's crazy that way. So tell me more about, working with celebrities, working overseas. Kid from Lodi is now traveling the world and doing some different details. What are some of the greatest experiences that you've had?
Well, first of all, I had a very good mentor in what I did. And one of my instructors, who was a CIA guy that retired out, and he really got me in protection. And he said to me, you're going to go on private jets, private yachts. You're going to be in the best places in the world and all this. He goes, and then when it's done, you're going home. He goes, so don't ever get caught up like you belong, because you don't. You're expendable. And I would see it many, many times where people would, because forget one-on-one protection. It doesn't work the right way. You always work in teams. Who's going to cover evacuate, who's going to lay out the advances, who's the clearing guy, all those things. So I have people that work for my agency. It's pretty big now. I have 100+ people that work for me, and they got caught up with, like, they thought that was their jet or that's their yacht. So I always say I got to see the best places in the world, but I always was looking the other way, because people here, if you go to a concert or a VIP event or meet a president, they're here, you're looking there, but some of the people that I really enjoyed way back when I was working for Tony Bennett, and I actually did him the last couple of years before he passed on. And Mr. Bennett, who was a gem of a soul, one day we were in Vegas. He was at a certain show. He's done. He's having his cappuccino. I asked him a question. I go, what was it like back in the day when Vegas was run by the mob? You know what? He said, at least you knew where you stood. He goes, the Rat Pack did their thing. And at that time, he was like 20-something years old, just up and coming. And he told me a lot of the old stories. And then I had done something with the Four Seasons reunion when they made the Hall of Fame. And I was with Tommy DeVito. And I listened to Mr. DeVito's talk about, because you watch the Jersey Boy movie, and guys grew up in my neighborhood. It wasn't, he goes, it wasn't like half, it wasn't even true, but they were mobbed up and they did a lot of money. But, and then I learned that people I worked for are not what I thought, without using names. I would be next to so-and-so, and they portray them as a tough guy and all, and they're fragile like an eggshell, so protection of celebrities was unique. Now, overseas is a different animal. You have to go in with your clientele. You may have to go to certain meetings with certain, people that are not the right type of people, but you want to go in there, know the laws, know the customs, because I've been on protection details where they threw protection guys out of the country because they dressed wrong, because they're wearing red in a society that doesn't allow red, or a black suit that's not allowed. So if you don't know the saying, when in Rome, if you don't respect someone's culture, you get a hard, lesson. And when I was in Saudi working with the Royal Guards, I went there with 12 people. By the end of the contract, there was 2 of us left. The other 10, they said,
Wow.
oh,
Wow.
So I'm glad my mom and dad taught me to be respectful of people's tradition and countries, because it carried a long way in my world.
Yeah. We brought up, the Rat Pack, and then you talked about, Jersey Boys, and it made me think about like movie stuff, right? Like, so you've probably seen a lot of movies about body bodyguards and detail work like you do. Um, what's it like watching a movie, and how different is it from what we see in film?
Okay, so Whitney Houston's movie with Kevin Costner, though he played a good
Right.
part and she was outstanding, there's a scene in there where all 6 of them are in the limousine. There's 3 in the front, 3 in the back. That will never happen in a million years. First of all, most targeted clients are around the car because it's vulnerable. So the truly is, a celebrity doesn't want you in the back of a limousine hearing what they say, what they do. Some have good habits, a lot have bad habits. So you're always in front. There's always a lead car or a tail car. I was disappointed because I know the guy that they hired to do the reality based stuff for that movie, and he totally messed it up. Now, was it a budget concern? I don't know, or maybe that's the way he lived his career, but I don't think much of the movies out there. I mean, look, do I like a good movie because it gets people into martial arts, like a John Wick and all that stuff?
Hmm.
Lies, yeah, it's good for business. The thing I wish we as martial art brothers and sisters would do is stop bad mouthing each other.
Yeah.
Not everybody's system is the ultimate system. If there was one ultimate system, Jason, and I know we'd only be one system, but there's
Right.
3,000 different systems. I believe in great instructors, not in great systems.
Hmm.
So as I talk, and I always stop at people's school and they'll ask me to do a guest, seminar, and I'll be like, listen, my stuff is not better than anybody's. It's just different. Here's a version from my playbook. If you like it, you use it. If not, you don't use it. That's how I do all my seminars. I don't get into who's better than who.
Hmm. Are you and are you still actively, traveling around doing seminars?
Yes, because when I'm out on the road, I'm like, I like to kill time, because if I'm doing a school district or even a protection job, I'll always look who's in the area. Now, when I created CDT way back when, I had over 3,000 instructors teaching, my control system. Now, I honed it back in there because it got too out of control. Now the CDT system is all run by me. You have to work for me. So my Facebook, Google, Microsoft contracts, Verizon, they're all done through my mother hub, but all the schools I've been maintained friendships with, and there's a lot of great guys out there and girls. So when I'm in there, I'm like, listen, if you don't mind, I'll pop in, and I don't want their money. Like, I don't care if they charge for it and they keep the money. I don't want anybody's money. I have a good life. So if I can help somebody or people want to ask me about business, I run 7 different types of business, from martial arts to consulting to medical. I own medical labs. I'm a
Hmm.
guy that's into a lot of different things, but I don't believe there's one way to get 300 students in your door the first month. I don't believe that.
Right.
Because if there is, then why don't you tell everybody? So instead of us declining in the martial arts, we'll, escalate.
Hmm.
I do believe that people teach the arts like we do because they love it. And I believe that you're successful because you got part of a business brain. Now, if people don't have that brain, they could get certain advice. But after 3 or 4 months, there's not much more advice that you could give. So a lot of times I'll go in there and see how they do their profit laws. How do they regulate their monthly income? What do they do on downtimes? And I just say, listen, from a guy that runs companies, forget the martial arts. This is what you should do better. This is how you stockpile. This is your rainy day stuff.
Hmm.
So I learned, that giving is better than taking, and I have no problem with that.
That's awesome. What would you say is the biggest mistake or pitfall that business owners make?
They believe the hype. Okay, they believe the hype. They read a lot. Bill Clark, great guy, Master
Yes,
Clark.
sir.
So Master Clark and I always have a good talk. I'm a big fan of who and what he is. Before being a real deal, to what he does. But he'll say that, he goes, Tom, they can only do so much. The thing is, why did they start their day so late? And why do they end their day so early? And I'm not talking about all the schools that are not successful. You got to eat, sleep, and everything you do. When I started my protection company and I came from overseas, I forgot one thing, Jason, that nobody knew who I was here. They knew who I was there. So
Right.
I had to reinvent myself. And then I actually got my first contract with Fox when I read an article that their bodyguards had gotten, beat up in a riot. And I called the head of Fox, which is a guy named Tom Carrillo, who actually was Bruce Lee's best friend. I did not know that
Hmm.
at the time. And Tom was a, Korean guy, very good in yards. And I'm like, listen, give me a shot at your contract and I'll do the first week for nothing. And if we get beat up or we get hurt, you don't ever have to hire me back. But if we do good, I want the contract for 5 years. Well, we were known as the Men in Black before the Men in Black ever came out, that movie. And we got the contracts for 15 years. And that really made me. That,
Wow.
the people I met, there was a guy named Tony Frangetti, Mr. Murdoch, because I did his wedding and things. They opened doors that other people could never do. So it's no different in any business. It's not always what you know. It's sometimes who you know.
Oh, absolutely. You started talking a little bit about, going into the schools and working with school districts. It's a big topic on a lot of the school districts' mind on how to deal with active shooter situations and the training that goes into that. What do you think schools really need to focus on to be safe, to be protected, to be educated?
Well, the biggest thing that I find out with school districts is that they're poor. They don't have the budgets. Okay. My girl is a special ed teacher, and I give her credit because that really, really, she's committed to her career. But I'll donate paper or pens, or I just bought them Halloween candy. I mean, because the schools don't have the money.
Hmm.
So the other thing is, look, can you make a school foolproof? Yeah, you could, but do you have hundreds of thousands of dollars? You don't. So they're doing the resource officer stuff, the special officer. They're teaching some teachers to carry guns. You know, my whole thing is there's not enough eyes on for you to see it coming. Think about how many doors in a school. Now, if
Hmm.
you were allowed to, which you're not by fire code, lock 99% of the doors have one way in, yeah, but fire code doesn't allow it. So somehow the government's got to get in tune, because when's the last time, and I say this in all my talks, that a school actually went on fire and the kids were trapped in there? You could research this for 40 years, you won't find one. So there's got to be a way to lock these doors and make them all electronic. Has to be. It can't be just a fire code thing. The other thing is people teaching kids to do dumb shit in plain English. Here's the gun, run and do what you have to do to stop it, even if you give up your life. I wouldn't want my son to give up his life. So why are you preaching that? And you're telling this to 12, 13, 14, 50-year-old kids? What are you, out of your mind? And the teachers or the administrators allow this type of talk? You have no idea how much I have to do on damage control when I talk to parents, when they say, well, what if my son died a hero? I go, do you want your son to be dead? They're like, no, but he saved other kids. I go, listen, there's ways of survival. Like an active shooter hasn't hit a moving target since this happened, which means your percentage of him hitting right now is 11% of him hitting standard targets. If these kids were zigzagging, changing their bodies, moving, and they created what I call control chaos, their chances of survival is 98, 99%. Where
Hmm.
is all that? I know we have the run, hide, fight mentality, but how do you run? And where do you hide? And what do you do when
Hmm.
you fight? So the biggest thing I see is we have the active shooter, and now what's going on overseas, which is a sin, is going to come here. Be ready. It's coming here. Everything that goes over there comes back here. And who do they target? They target the kids because it breaks our heart.
Yeah. Yeah. So I hear this, the run, hide, fight, and I've talked with our own school district and talked with teachers, and it was just actually not that long ago, maybe a month or a little longer than a month ago. I had several teachers come to me and say, "So, we were taught run, hide, fight, but we don't get taught how to fight. Like we don't get taught like anything. It's a lot of theory and a lot of talking, but not real clear direction. Does that make sense? Does that
Yeah,
sound
absolutely.
familiar?
Yep.
And so, I mean, what again? I guess it comes to money, right? If the school doesn't have enough money to pay for training or to offer training, for me, it turned into a great opportunity because I had enough teachers that were so concerned of not having any understanding of the fight response, that they invited me to come teach a seminar just for their staff, just so
Oh,
they have some basic hands-on stuff. I mean, but let me tell you that's like pulling teeth trying to get into schools to do stuff like this because you know uh, the other thing is, how do you feel about every school having someone armed? I mean, we have a resource officer that travels from school to school in our district. Now we only have 6 elementary schools, 2.5 middle schools, and a high school, so we've got a pretty small district. We're a small 35,000 population, and we've got the resource officer who's obviously armed. But what are your thoughts on having someone that's having the opportunity to be armed on school campus?
oh, I'm all about that. The thing that happens, in our school districts, we actually have 2 or 3 people because of the size of the schools. But the thing that really has a problem with the aspect of armed personnel is where are they stationed? Because that's a
Mm,
job of boredom. You're waiting around for something that may not or may happen. Everywhere I go, everywhere I talk to all the armed officers, and they're like, you want to pull your hair out of your head because, how much can you stand at this door? The second thing is, who's ever coming in there, they're going to know where the person is. So, movement of that person, of that officer is key, and the ammunition that they keep in their weapons. Let them use the explosion rounds that don't go through other things, full metal jackets, or go hollow points, or the old Hydra shock mentality where they open up, because that's what I worry about most is, shot placement, because,
mhm,
68% of all people under duress will miss their target.
right.
They're going to miss, and that's not because they're bad shots. It's just because it's over adrenaline rush kicks in too quick, so I'm back to, can they seal the school in a different way, like electronically and things? Yeah, they can, and it's not that it cost effective. But will they? No, because if there's 100,000 schools and there's only 24 incidents in a week, they'll say, well, statistically, 98%, it's not going to happen to us. And that's
Right.
usually when it happens to them. So, but I'm
Right.
big about armed people. I don't know about teachers, though. I actually attended a class in Texas with teachers.
Yeah.
I was a guest instructor because, I do teach firearms. And, we put them down in chairs. We had them move and all that stuff. They couldn't do anything. They couldn't hit nothing, so anybody could stand and do this. But have
Right.
people move, people screaming, senses changing, fight or flight kicks in, visual purple blows out. What do you do? So if they do that, they got to come up with a really aggressive training course.
Yeah. Well, and that's really what it comes down to is having the proper training, because it is a very different situation to point and shoot at a target that's not moving, no stress around you. But once
And
you
that's
add
not
that
shooting
stress,
back.
right, right. Well, I mean, and think about it in even just a hand to hand combat self defense. Practicing a self defense technique back and forth in class is very different than having someone that puts stress on you, that's moving you, that's pulling you, that's hitting you first and then grabbing you, all these different things that change our
You bring a
reaction.
good subject up. I just want to capitalize. So when I was writing my book, I interviewed the good, the bad, and the ugly, as I said. And I had a gentleman that came off the internet who was a high level martial art guy, who actually was a very well known tournament fighter. I'm not going to use his name. And he said, Tom, I'd like you to put me in your book, but I don't want you to put me under my name. I said, all right, so tell me a story. He says, well, I was in New York City. He said, I was with my girl. She dressed a little provocative. So a guy said something to her, and I went up to him and said, don't respect my girl. And the guy said, what are you going to do? And he says, and I threw a front kick at him. He says, but I threw it and I pulled it back. He goes, because the whole week we were throwing kicks just to miss each other. He goes, when I threw the kick back, he came in on me and he goes, he put me in the hospital. He broke my jaw, my optical socket, and all that because I didn't execute the kick. And I said, well, have you ever, fought anybody on the street? He goes, no. He goes, but that guy, I remember seeing in his eyes, he didn't care. Even if I would have hit him, he didn't care. He was all about hurting. I'm like, yeah. So we somehow as instructors, and I know you probably have unique drills, other people do, you have to get that closing the gap. And though we can't hurt each other, they have to know what it is to be up and personal. Otherwise, guys grew up on the street with no training that have been hurting people since they're 10, that don't care about their assets, don't care about their life. They don't care about you. They'll go through you like butter. So,
right. Well, having come from a very traditional background, it's funny that you talk about the throwing the front kicks to miss, or we would practice throwing punches at each other, but never to hit each other. I have an instructor who has a similar story who told me that he was grabbed or attacked in a bar, and he went to turn around and he threw the punch and he came like this close, but didn't actually hit him, and then the guy just kind of took over from there. And we hear that a lot. It wasn't until incorporating Krav Maga in our system that I ever really faced any true stress in self-defense. It was always, prior to that, it was always an attacker that, for the most part cooperated. And then we see a very different side of it in the Krav Maga system that we train in now, which has definitely changed my whole outlook on, wow, stress really causes a huge change in everything, especially with multiple attackers.
Yeah, and like Krav and other systems out there, that's a good system. Mike Lee Canary's got Fight, that's another good system. And there's some really good, ground system, Brazilian system, and hand-to-hand system. But the thing is, whatever the system may be, how many people want to get that close in a classroom and really go to it? Because the adult population now in the martial arts is at its lowest it's ever been, at its lowest. And I know that. I see these schools. So Krav, that's pretty big around here, is used more like in cardio stuff. Women taking cardio classes and other people. And you have 10-year-olds doing it, 12-year-olds. Now, I'm not big on teaching a 10-year-old to disarm somebody. That's not my thing, because they don't have an idea of destruction a weapon will do, But how somebody may approach it, that's another thing. So the systems are there. The systems are in place from here all over the world. It's just to motivate mainstream, especially adults, just is lacking right now. So
yeah, it's definitely interesting because when people come into the program, they have this preconceived idea of what it's going to be, and like you said, a little bit of cardio, a little bit of hitting the bags, hitting the mitts, kind of fun, stress relief, all these great things that are, positive benefits of martial arts. But as soon as we get to the, someone's on top of you and trying to rain down with a knife, someone gets on top of you with a gun, someone is choking you, literally choking you, and you're feeling that impact, you're feeling that physicality, and people are just like, whoa. I mean, we've seen so many people just go into shutdown mode, and it's pretty scary to see that. That's really the natural reaction is to almost shut down.
A good friend of mine retired from the special forces, and he told me his story. He said he was in a battle in Fallujah, and he says, and they're motivated and programmed, whatever. He goes, and he went through the door, and the first thing that happened is he got shot. And I said, well, what'd you think? He goes, they didn't tell me I was going to get shot. He goes, I came back. He goes, but I'm sitting there with bleeding. I'm like, where did they leave this out of the equation? So it's like what you said, a guy comes up, and I've seen it in my line of work where people will approach somebody and say something, and the guy will be like, well, I'm messing with me. I'm a 4th degree black belt. And the guy will just level him, never care, doesn't mean nothing to him. And he'll just take them apart, so sometimes avoidance works better. So,
Yeah, cool. Well, hey, listen, as we're getting near that hour mark here, I want to give anybody that is watching an opportunity to ask any questions. If you have any questions for Tom, any questions at all, please post them in the comments. I'll be happy to bring it up for you guys. But Tom, this has been an awesome conversation, just kind of talking a little bit about everything, in and out of your career and the things that you've done. What would you say is your greatest success in your career?
Well, I'm from the mindset of when people tell me I can't do something, I go do it. So, I can't write a book. I wrote a book. I can't do overseas protection. I became one of the best. I can't teach safety. I'm the top guy out there on TV. I don't want it easy. I never have, but now at this stage of my life, I would like what you're doing. And I see it from the outside, and I've watched you through the years. I've seen your skills come up. I also saw you change your presentation when you became a father. So I'm a guy that stays out on the walls and just watches. So you're opening people's eyes, and you're giving them a chance to say their story. I'm out there trying to say, hey, listen, you know what? We're a brotherhood, a sisterhood. Let's band together. If all of us as martial art people got on the same page, not technique wise, mentality wise, let's help each other, we would not be something that people do as an option. We would be a must. And that I hope changes in my lifetime.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because I often talk to parents and I'm like, there's 2 things that you have to teach your kids how to do. One is to swim, and the other is have some tools to know how to protect yourself. Right. I mean, without those 2 things, like, I don't know. I mean, obviously, staying in shape and eating healthy, these are all self-preservation, ideals, right? Eating healthy, working out, being aware. But yeah, and to get everybody in the martial arts to get on the same page, it's wacky to me. I was involved in professional wrestling, and they say that that's a wacky world.
Not a thing. That was pretty good, by the way.
Thanks.
I worked for Hulk Hogan.
Did you?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Professional wrestling was like the wackiest business I'd ever, like the wackiest group of people. But like, I look at the martial arts industry, and I've been in it a minute, and I've gotten to see, lots of different groups and lots of different people come together. And it's just amazing how still after all this time, this group wants to be better than that group. This style wants to be better than that style. And everybody's like a one up, instead of doing, really what we preach in our schools, right? Isn't our goal to help everybody in our school become better than they were yesterday, right? Imagine if everybody in the martial arts industry, all they did was help each other be better than they were yesterday. I think that you're 100% correct that as a whole, we would be able to really make a bigger and better change by doing it. But it's crazy that it doesn't happen.
And I say this all the time. I was just at an event speaking to school owners. I'm like, would you guys relax on the Hall of Fames? I mean, how many friggin' Hall of Fames you guys going to be in there? So we, as business people, if I could be in a Hall of Fame or I could go make $1, I'm taking the dollar. I don't need the ego. And that's what we got to change.
Yeah. That takes a bit of maturity and a bit of time for that to actually happen, because as you said before, one of the biggest mistakes that business owners make is believe in the hype. How many martial artists believe their own hype, and put themselves on the same pedestal that other people put them on. I can't say that I'm completely without any of that, but I hope that this podcast in some way shows that, hey, we can all raise each other up, right? I love having different martial artists on this podcast to give them the platform to share and to tell their story and to be authentic and transparent and to be vulnerable, as we discussed in the very beginning of the conversation. So, that's I think if we all do a little, we can help out a lot. And so that's my goal, is just to do my little part each week. So.
Well, I want to end with this. I want to say I'm proud of you, because what you're doing, you went into other waters that you were not familiar with, and you're doing great. And you know what? I have a saying, I never look behind me. I always look forward. So I don't care what's over there. I only care what's over here. Anything I could help you, or, I hope one day when I'm in California, I stop and say hi at your school.
That would be amazing. That would be great. Well, listen, thank you so much for being on the show. Hang out for a minute or so we can have a quick chat before we go. But thank you, everybody that was watching today. Fico was on here today, and my mom. Hi, Mom. My mom was watching here, and several others were watching. So, guys, thank you for watching. Please make sure to go to YouTube and subscribe to the Master Motivation Podcast. This week's going to be a very busy week because I've been catching up from last week when I wasn't feeling too well. So I'll have a podcast every day this week. So tune in, guys. Do me a favor. Once again, share the video and spread the love. Tom Patire, thank you so much for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. See you guys.